the air in the grand ballroom thick with the scent of expensive perfume and ambition, crackled with energy. On stage, Julian Vance, a titan of industry, was celebrating his crowning achievement. But it wasn't the skyscraper he was unveiling that held the city captive. It was the woman whose arm he held her fingers intertwined with his. Her name was Isabella, his brilliant protégée, and her triumphant smile was a dagger in the heart of a silent watcher. But the real story wasn't on the stage. It was about to walk through the ballroom doors holding an object of myth and power, a family seal that could build empires or, on a night like this, burn one to the ground. Elara Vance believed in structure. As one of New York's most sought-after architects, she understood that the most beautiful facades often concealed the most complex and sometimes compromised foundations. Her own life was a testament to this principle. To the outside world, she was the elegant, intelligent wife of Julian Vance, the visionary CEO of Vance Holdings. Their life was a blueprint of success, a sprawling Manhattan penthouse overlooking Central Park. Two bright children, Liam and Sophia, at an elite private school, and a philanthropic presence that made them the darlings of the city's upper crust. Their marriage, once a passionate joint venture, had slowly been renovated into a polite, functional partnership. The late-night conversations about art and ambition had been replaced by shared calendars and brief logistical check-ins. Julian, once her confidant, had become a man she admired from a distance, a brilliant comet streaking across the business world. He was consumed by his latest project, the Meridian Tower, a gleaming, audacious skyscraper that would forever alter the New York skyline. It was his legacy, he said. Their legacy. But Elara saw the hairline fractures. They appeared in the form of late nights he claimed were spent at the office, but his shoes were oddly clean for a man supposedly visiting a construction site. They were in the hushed phone calls that ended abruptly when she entered the room, the scent of a perfume not her own, lingering faintly on his jacket. He was a master builder, but he had grown careless in constructing his lies. The name that haunted these fractures was Isabella Rossi. Young, fiercely intelligent, and ravenously ambitious. Isabella was Julian's head of global strategy. He had discovered her, mentored her, and now it seemed he adored her. Elara had watched them together at company functions. She saw the way Isabella looked at him, a mixture of hero worship and proprietary hunger. She saw the way Julian's eyes would soften, a warmth reserved only for Isabella, now a warmth Elara herself hadn't felt in years. Elara was not a fool. She didn't confront him. A public scene was not her style. It was messy, unstructured, and would achieve nothing but her own humiliation. Instead, she began her own quiet project of emotional excavation. While Julian was building his monument of glass and steel, Elara was uncovering the decaying framework of their marriage. She did it with the same meticulous precision she applied to her architectural designs. She noted dates, times, and discrepancies. She spoke to her lawyer, a discreet man named Marcus Thorne, under the guise of estate planning. The true foundation of their union wasn't love, not anymore. It was the Vance legacy. The Vance family wasn't just wealthy. They were a dynasty built over a century. And at the heart of that dynasty was a tangible piece of its history, the Vance family seal. It was not a mere trinket. It was a hefty, ornate signet made of gold and lapis lazuli, bearing the family crest, a lone wolf staring at a northern star. For generations it had been passed down, but its significance was more than ceremonial. Julian's great-grandfather, a shrewd and distrustful patriarch, had woven its power into the very legal DNA of the company. A clause buried deep within the bylaws of Vance Holdings stipulated that the holder of the seal, traditionally the spouse of the CEO, the guardian of the family's heart, had the deciding vote in any emergency meeting concerning the removal of the chairman of the board. It was a relic of a bygone era, a moral emergency clause designed to protect the company from a leader who brought disgrace upon the family name. Julian, in his modern arrogance, had dismissed it as sentimental nonsense. "It's a beautiful piece of history, darling," he'd told Elara on their wedding day as he placed the heavy velvet-lined box in her hands. "A symbol of you being the soul of this family." Elara, however, had read the bylaws. She understood its true purpose. It wasn't a symbol of the soul. It was a weapon for the mind. For the past year, as Julian's affair with Isabella became an open secret, whispered at dinner parties, she wasn't invited to the seal had sat in a safe in her private study. She would often take it out, the cold, heavy gold, a stark contrast to the hollow ache in her chest. She wasn't just a wife. She was a custodian, and she was beginning to understand that some structures were not meant to be saved, but to be demolished to make way for something stronger. The invitation to the Meridian Tower Gala arrived on a crisp October morning. It was printed on thick, cream-colored cardstock, the ink a shimmering gold. It was a celebration of Julian's triumph. Elara looked at it, her reflection faintly visible in the glossy finish. She knew Isabella would be there, not as a guest, but as a queen in waiting. And she knew, with the chilling certainty of a perfect calculation, that this was the night the foundation would finally give way. She went to her study, opened the safe, and took out the box. The time for silent observation was over. It was time for a new design. The weeks leading up to the gala were a masterclass in deception. Julian was effusively attentive, a man trying to shore up a crumbling wall with a fresh coat of paint. He brought her flowers, praised her latest design award, and spoke animatedly about how the gala would be a night for them, a testament to their partnership. "You are my foundation, Elara," he said one evening, his hand covering hers across the vast expanse of their mahogany dining table. His touch felt foreign, a trespass. "None of this," he gestured vaguely at the opulent room, "the tower, the company. None of it would be stable without you." Elara smiled, a placid architectural curve of her lips that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm so proud of you, Julian." She had learned to speak his language, a dialect of half-truths and grand pronouncements. Inside, she was a whirlwind of cold fury and methodical planning. Her days were a study in duality. In the mornings, she was Elara Vance, mother and wife, discussing school projects with Liam and Sophia, approving menus with the household staff. In the afternoons, she became a forensic accountant of her own life. With Marcus Thorne's guidance, she delved into the corporate structure of Vance Holdings. She traced Julian's spending, noting the lavish business expenses at five-star hotels where no conferences were held, the jewelry purchases from Cartier, that she never received the lease on a private apartment in Soho under a subsidiary's name. The apartment was Isabella's. Elara knew it instinctively. She hired a discreet private investigator, a former detective named David Chen, a man who specialized in the quiet implosions of the wealthy. He didn't provide salacious photos. Elara had no need for them. She needed data, financial entanglements, proof of recklessness that went beyond infidelity and crossed into corporate malfeasance. Chen's report was delivered in a plain manila envelope. It was worse than she had imagined. Julian hadn't just bought Isabella gifts. He had made her a partner in a shell corporation, diverting company funds to purchase art for the Meridian Tower's lobby art that was wildly overvalued and sourced from a gallery co-owned by Isabella's cousin. He had fast-tracked her for stock options, far exceeding her role, citing performance metrics that were clearly fabricated. He wasn't just having an affair. He was compromising the company. He was putting their children's legacy at risk for his infatuation. The report was the final piece of her blueprint. The betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was a structural failure that threatened the entire Vance empire. Her resolve hardened from a shield into a sword. This was no longer about a broken heart. It was about protecting her family and a 100-year-old legacy from the man who was supposed to be its guardian. The night before the gala, Julian came home late. He smelled of wine and Isabella's signature Chanel No. 5. He found Elara in her study, sketching at her drafting table. The box containing the Vance seal sat on the corner of the desk, closed. "Working late?" he asked, trying for a casual tone. "Just finalizing a design," she replied, her voice calm, her hand steady as she drew a perfectly straight line. Sometimes you have to see the whole structure before you can be sure of the details. He came up behind her, placing his hands on her shoulders. His touch was meant to be reassuring, but it felt like a weight. "Tomorrow night, the whole world will see what we've built." Elara paused her sketching. She looked at the intricate design on the paper, a complex facade for a new museum. "Yes," she said softly. Her eyes focused on the lines. "They will." He kissed the top of her head and left oblivious. He saw a wife, a partner, an accessory to his success. He did not see the strategist who had already mapped his downfall. Alone, Elara opened the box. The gold of the wolf and the deep blue of the lapis lazuli seemed to absorb the light in the room. It felt heavier than ever, not with the weight of the past, but with the gravity of the future. She closed the lid with a soft, final click. The Meridian Tower Gala was the heart of the city that night. The venue was a custom-built pavilion at the base of the tower itself, a cathedral of glass and light, offering the assembled guests a breathtaking view of Julian's creation as it speared the night sky. Limousines deposited figures of immense wealth and influence onto a red carpet, swarming with photographers. The air hummed with the electric buzz of power, a symphony of hushed, deal-making air kisses, and the clinking of champagne flutes. Elara had chosen her attire with the precision of a general selecting armor. She wore a bespoke gown by a minimalist designer, a column of deep emerald silk that was elegant, severe, and utterly commanding. It was not a dress that sought to entice. It was a dress that declared its presence. Her dark hair was swept back in a chignon, showcasing a pair of diamond earrings, a Vance heirloom from Julian's grandmother. They were her only concession to the role of the CEO's wife. She arrived deliberately late and alone. Her driver, a man who had been with the family for 20 years, simply nodded as he opened her door, his expression one of quiet loyalty. Her entrance caused a ripple of whispers. The society columns had been speculating for months about the state of the Vance marriage. Her solitary arrival was a statement. Julian, holding court near the stage, saw her immediately. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face, quickly masked by a brilliant smile as he excused himself and strode towards her. "Darling, you're here. You look magnificent," he said, kissing her cheek. The gesture was for the cameras a piece of public theatre. "I was getting worried." "There was no need to worry, Julian. I wouldn't miss your big night," she replied, her voice cool and even. She allowed him to take her arm and lead her into the throng, playing her part. She endured the parade of pleasantries. The mayor, the governor-rival developers who clapped Julian on the back with envy-laced congratulations. Through it all, she was acutely aware of Isabella Rossi, circling them like a shark. Isabella was a vision in crimson, a stark, passionate contrast to Ilara's cool emerald. She was never far from Julian's side, interjecting with a brilliant strategic point, laughing at his jokes with an intimacy that was brazen. She was marking her territory. Several times Ilara saw them exchange glances over the heads of the crowd, glances that were conspiratorial, possessive and utterly dismissive of her own presence. They were so confident in their private world that they had forgotten it existed within a larger one she still commanded. An old family friend, a formidable matriarch named Beatrice Fairchild, squeezed Ilara's arm. "You have the patience of a saint, my dear," she murmured, her sharp eyes flicking towards Isabella. Ilara gave a small, enigmatic smile. "Patience is a strategic asset, Beatrice." The lights dimmed, signaling the start of the formal presentation. A hush fell over the crowd as a slickly produced video played showcasing the tower's construction in a dramatic time-lapse set to a soaring orchestral score. It was a monument to Julian's ego, and the crowd loved it. Finally, Julian took the stage to a thunderous ovation. He was a master showman, radiating charm and power. He spoke of vision, of legacy, of building the future. Ilara watched from a front-row table, her expression unreadable, a marble sculpture amidst a sea of adoring faces. A project of this magnitude is never the work of one man. Julian boomed, his voice resonating with practiced humility. It takes a team of brilliant, dedicated people. And there is one person whose strategic vision, whose relentless drive has been the true engine behind the Meridian. She is not just my head of strategy. She is my partner in shaping the future of this company. A knot tightened in Ilara's stomach. She knew what was coming. Please join me in welcoming to the stage the incomparable Isabella Rossi. The applause was polite, but tinged with confusion as Isabella ascended the stage. She walked not to the secondary podium, but directly to Julian's side. He beamed, his face alight with an unguarded adoration that he hadn't shown Ilara in a decade. In a gesture that shattered every remaining shard of public decorum, he took her hand, raised it to his lips for a brief kiss, and then held it firmly, turning to face the audience with her. For a moment, there was only the sound of 1,000 camera shutters firing in rapid succession. The flashes were like lightning, illuminating the tableau on stage, the triumphant man, the radiant mistress, and the unspoken declaration of a new reign. It was a coup executed in the brightest of spotlights. Isabella, glowing with victory, leaned into the microphone. "Julian is too modest," she began, her voice smooth as velvet. His vision wasn't just about building a tower. It was about building a new kind of legacy, one unburdened by the past and focused solely on the future. I am honored to be a part of his future. The subtext was a sledgehammer, unburdened by the past. She was talking about Ilara. Down at the front table, time seemed to slow for Ilara. She could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes darting between her and the stage. They were looking for the reaction. They expected tears, a hasty, humiliated exit. They expected the woman scorned. The air grew thick with a collective, voyeuristic pity. The whispers started quiet at first, then growing into a low, pervasive hum of scandal. "Did you see that? Right in front of his wife. How could he?" She's pure class. This is career suicide. Elara did not move. She kept her chin straight, her gaze fixed on the stage. She watched as Julian put his arm around Isabella's waist, a gesture of ownership and pride. He was so blinded by his own brilliance, so insulated by his success, that he believed he was untouchable. He believed he could rewrite the rules, not just of real estate, but of honor, of family, of loyalty. He had forgotten that foundations, even those of glass and steel, rely on principles far older than any modern blueprint. She felt nothing. The pain, the rage, the grief. She had processed those emotions in the silent solitude of her study over the past year. What remained was a cold, clear purpose. This public humiliation was not her defeat. It was his. He had just handed her the very thing she needed, a public, undeniable act of disgrace. He had invoked the spirit, if not the letter, of the moral emergency clause. On stage, Julian raised their joined hands. "To the meridian!" he shouted. "To the future!" Isabella echoed. The applause that followed was scattered, uncertain. The celebratory mood had evaporated, replaced by the thrilling, uncomfortable tension of a public immolation. Julian and Isabella seemed oblivious, lost in their shared moment of triumph, a two-person kingdom on a brightly lit stage. Elara waited for the applause to die down. She picked up her evening bag from the table. It was a simple, elegant clutch, but it felt as heavy as a briefcase. Inside, nestled in silk lining, was the Vance family seal. She stood up. Her movement was unhurried, graceful, and it captured the attention of everyone nearby. The whispers ceased. One by one, heads turned in her direction. A path began to clear for her, as if by an invisible force. The city's most powerful people parted before her. Her heels made a soft, rhythmic click on the polished marble floor, the only sound in a suddenly cavernous silence. She was not walking away. She was walking towards the stage. Every eye in the room was on Elara as she approached the stage. The spotlights meant for Julian and Isabella seemed to find her tracing her deliberate, inexorable path. On stage, Julian's triumphant smile faltered. He saw her coming, saw the unnerving calm in her eyes, and a flicker of unease, then alarm, crossed his face. Isabella's grip on his arm tightened, her victorious expression hardening into one of defiant possession. Elara didn't look at the audience. Her gaze was locked on her husband. She reached the short set of stairs at the side of the stage and ascended them with the same measured grace. When she reached the podium, she stood not beside Julian, but directly in front of him, creating a triangle of tension that was palpable throughout the ballroom. The silence was now absolute, heavy, and expectant. "A beautiful speech, Julian," Elara said, her voice perfectly modulated, carrying through the microphone without a tremor. "You spoke of legacy. It's a word you use often." Julian forced a tight, dismissive laugh. "Elara, this isn't the time or the place." "On the contrary," she replied, her voice dropping slightly, drawing the entire room in. "I can think of no better place to discuss the Vance legacy than here in front of the monument you've built to it." She turned her head slightly, her eyes sweeping over Isabella for the first time. It was not a look of hatred or jealousy, but one of clinical assessment, as if observing a curious but ultimately insignificant specimen. "And no better time than when you are sharing the stage with your partner in shaping the future." The sarcasm was subtle, a razor blade wrapped in silk. Isabella flinched. Elara then turned her attention back to the audience. For over a century, The Vance family has been guided by two things: bold vision and unwavering integrity. One without the other is not progress. It is recklessness. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. From her evening bag, she withdrew the Vance family seal. It was larger and more substantial than a simple ring. She held it in her palm, the stage lights glinting off the polished gold and the deep blue of the lapis. It looked ancient, powerful, a piece of forgotten royalty. A gasp rippled through the older members of the crowd, those who knew the family's history. Beatrice Fairchild leaned forward in her seat, her eyes wide. "Most of you see this as a family heirloom." Elara continued, her voice resonating with a newfound authority. "Julian once told me it was a symbol of my role as the soul of the family. It is a lovely sentiment. It is also incorrect." She held the seal up for all to see. "This is not just a symbol. According to the founding bylaws of Vance Holdings, bylaws drafted by a patriarch who understood that character was the ultimate collateral, this seal is an instrument of corporate governance." Julian's face had gone pale. "Elara, stop this," he hissed, taking a step toward her. She held up a hand, and he froze. It was a simple gesture, yet it held the force of an iron gate slamming shut. "Article 9, Section 4. Elara announced, her voice as clear as a bell. "In the event of a moral emergency, defined as any public action by the chairman that brings profound and undeniable disgrace upon the family name, and thereby threatens the stability and reputation of the corporation, the designated holder of the family seal is granted the authority to call an emergency session of the board. And at that session," she let her eyes meet Julian's, "the holder of this seal casts the deciding vote on the chairman's fitness to lead." The silence in the room was shattered by a cacophony of frantic murmurs. Reporters were scribbling furiously. Lawyers were exchanging shocked glances. This wasn't a marital spat. This was a boardroom assassination. "You are confusing a sentimental tradition with corporate law." Julian stammered, his bravado crumbling. "Am I?" Elara's smile was chilling. "Marcus Thorne of Sullivan and Cromwell reviewed the charter this afternoon. He confirmed its validity. Perhaps you should have read the fine print of your own legacy, Julian." She took a step closer to him, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet every word was picked up by the microphone. "You stand here tonight and speak of the future while publicly dishonoring the woman who is the legal guardian of your family's past and your children's future. You have confused your ego with an empire. You have compromised this company with your recklessness both personally and financially." She then looked out at the sea of stunned faces, her gaze sweeping across the board members who were present. "Consider this my formal invocation of Article 9, Section 4. An emergency board meeting will be convened tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. I trust you will all be there." With that, she placed the Vance family seal deliberately on the podium, the heavy thud echoing like a gavel. She gave Julian one last lingering look, not of anger, but of pity. Then, without a backward glance at him or the woman clinging to his arm, she turned and walked off the stage. The silence held for a moment longer before the room erupted into absolute chaos. Elara Vance did not run. She walked head held high through the pandemonium. She had unleashed the architect of a demolition so precise no one had seen it coming. The chaos of the gala was merely the overture. The real battle would be fought not in the court of public opinion, but in the sterile, soundproofed boardroom on the 80th floor of the old Vance Tower. Elara knew that her public gambit was just that, an opening move. Julian was cornered, but not defeated. He was charismatic, ruthless, and he had spent years cultivating loyalty among the board members, men and women who owed their careers to him. She had the law on her side, but power is rarely so straightforward. She didn't go home. The penthouse felt tainted a stage for a different kind of performance. Instead, she had her driver take her to the Carlisle, where she had booked a suite under her maiden name, Ilara Thorne, a small act of reclaiming her own identity. She spent less than an hour there, changing from her emerald gown into a sharply tailored navy blue suit. Then she made a call. Her destination was a place of old power, a Georgian mansion in the quiet hills of Westchester County. It was the home of Arthur Vance Sr., Julian's father, and the retired patriarch of the empire. Arthur was a relic of a different era, a gruff, formidable man who believed in honor, tradition, and the sanctity of the Vance name above all else. He had been fond of Ilara in a distant paternal way, but he worshipped his son. Convincing him would be like moving a mountain. She found him in his library, a vast room of dark wood and leather, a portrait of his own stern father glowering down from above the marble fireplace. He was nursing a brandy, the news from the gala having already reached him. "You've made a terrible mess, Ilara," he said, his voice a low rumble. He didn't ask her to sit. "No, Arthur," she replied, her voice firm, refusing to be intimidated. "Julian made a mess. I have simply begun the process of cleaning it up. You humiliated my son. You humiliated this family in front of the entire city. Your son did that when he chose to publicly discard his wife and flaunt his mistress on a stage bearing our family name." She countered, her calm unwavering. "He did it when he used company funds to finance his affair. He did it when he valued his ego more than a century of Vance integrity." She walked to the large oak desk and placed a slim leather-bound folio upon it. It was David Chen's report, condensed and annotated by her lawyers. "This is not about infidelity, Arthur. This is about fitness to lead. Read it. It details the shell corporations, the fraudulent art purchases, the compromised stock options. He has exposed this company to shareholder lawsuits and a media firestorm that will cripple the stock price by morning." Arthur stared at the folio, then back at her. His eyes narrowed. "He is my son. He built the Meridian. He built it with Vance money and Vance resources." Ilara said, her voice softening slightly, shifting from accusation to strategy. "He is a brilliant builder. I have never denied that. But he has forgotten what the name on that tower truly represents. It represents you. It represents his grandfather. It represents my children, Liam and Sophia." The mention of his grandchildren, the future of the line, was the first chink in his armor. He finally gestured to a chair. "What do you want, Ilara? I want to save the company," she said simply. "Julian is compromised. His judgment is clouded. When the market opens, our competitors will smell blood in the water. We need to project strength, stability. We need a new leader immediately." "And I suppose you think that should be you?" he scoffed. "No," Ilara said, and this surprised him. "That would be seen as a vengeful coup. Too messy. We need a steady hand. Someone the board and the street will respect without question. Someone who represents continuity and tradition." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I think it should be you." Arthur stared at her, genuinely stunned. He had been retired for 10 years. "You resume your role as interim chairman," Ilara explained, laying out her plan. "Your presence will calm the markets. It shows the old guard is back in control. I will take a seat on the board, as is my right by marriage, and as a significant shareholder in my children's trust. I will oversee a special committee on corporate governance to undo the damage Julian has done. We will present a united front, a family protecting its legacy." He was silent for a long time, swirling the brandy in his glass, the gears of his formidable mind turning. He was a proud man, and Julian's public behavior was a deep stain on his own name. Elara hadn't come to him as a crying, betrayed wife. She had come as a strategist, offering him a path back to power and a way to salvage the family's honor. She had appealed not to his heart, but to his most sacred value, the legacy. "He will fight you," Arthur said finally. "He will fight us both." "Yes, he will," Elara agreed. "He will call in every favor, but he is leading with emotion and arrogance. We will lead with facts and with the full weight of the Vance name. With your support and the evidence in that folio, the board will have no choice. They must choose between a compromised visionary and the patriarch who built the company into what it is today." She stood to leave. "The meeting is at 9. The seal gives me the deciding vote in a tie. With you it won't be a tie. It will be an abdication." Arthur looked from the folio on his desk to the powerful portrait of his father. He saw the same steely resolve in the eyes of his daughter-in-law. He slowly, deliberately stood up. "I will be there," he said. Elara nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of their new, fragile alliance. As she left the quiet mansion and stepped back into the cool night air, she knew she had secured her most powerful piece. The kingdom was gathering. The 80-story climb in the private elevator was a journey through a column of silence. Elara stood perfectly still, her reflection a stark silhouette against the polished chrome walls. She was ascending into the heart of the empire she had helped build, to the place where Julian was king. But today, she was not coming as his queen. She was coming as the executor of a long-dormant law, an instrument of a justice he had long since forgotten. The boardroom on the 80th floor was designed to intimidate. It was a masterpiece of corporate power, a long, cavernous space encased in floor-to-ceiling glass that offered a godlike panorama of Manhattan. The city sprawled below a toy set of ambition and dreams, humbled by the viewer's sheer altitude. In the center of the room sat a vast, monolithic table of polished black obsidian, so reflective it seemed to hold a darker, colder version of the sky above. 12 high-backed leather chairs were arranged around it, thrones for the titans of industry. Elara was the first to arrive. Punctuality, like patience, was a strategic asset. She wanted to occupy the space to let it become hers before the battle began. She walked the length of the room, her footsteps silent on the plush, charcoal-grey carpet. She didn't take a seat at either end of the table, the traditional seats of power, but chose a chair at the very center of its long side. It was a deliberate choice. She was not here to seize the throne, but to act as the fulcrum upon which the entire structure would pivot. On the gleaming obsidian surface, she placed 2 objects, the slim, lethal folio of evidence, and beside it, the Vance family seal. The ancient gold and lapis lazuli looked almost alien in the hyper-modern setting, a piece of old-world magic amidst cold, hard commerce. The board members began to file in a collection of men and women who collectively controlled billions of dollars. They entered in hushed tones, the usual back-slapping camaraderie entirely absent. The air was thick with the news from the gala. They saw Elara, a solitary, composed figure, and their reactions were telling. Robert Caldwell, the company's lead counsel, and a man whose loyalty to Julian was legend, gave her a curt, dismissive nod before taking the seat to the right of the chairman's empty chair. Eleanor Hayes, a sharp woman in her late 60s, who had served on the board alongside Arthur Vance for 2 decades, offered Elara a look of grim, sympathetic respect. Ben Carter, the youngest board member, a tech wunderkind who valued data above all else, simply observed her with an unreadable, analytical gaze. Julian arrived 5 minutes late, a calculated power move that fell flat in the tense atmosphere. He strode in, attempting an air of defiant bravado. He was immaculately dressed, but the dark circles under his eyes and the slight tremor in his hand as he placed his briefcase on the table betrayed a sleepless night. He ignored Elara completely, instead greeting Caldwell and a few other allies with a forced warmth that didn't reach his eyes. His gaze, however, kept flicking toward the seal on the table as if it were a venomous snake. The final arrival silenced the room. Arthur Vance, Sr., entered his presence, sucking the remaining oxygen from the air. He didn't look like a retired man. He looked like a king returning from exile. His face was set like granite, and his cold blue eyes, so like his son's, yet so much harder, swept across the room. He gave Elara a single, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement before taking the seat at the opposite head of the table from his son. The message was clear. The family was divided, and the patriarch had chosen his side. Robert Caldwell, acting as Julian's proxy, called the meeting to order. His voice was smooth, but laced with aggression. "We are convened today under the dubious invocation of a little-known and frankly archaic clause by Mrs. Elara Vance. Before we proceed, I want to state for the record that it is the position of the chairman that this is a gross misuse of corporate procedure, an attempt to leverage a domestic dispute. My husband's affair is indeed a domestic dispute, Robert." Elara's voice cut through his calm and sharp as shattered glass. Everyone turned to her. She had not raised her voice yet. She commanded the room. "However, I did not invoke Article 9 because my husband was unfaithful. I invoked it because the chairman of Vance Holdings has become a liability to this corporation." She opened the folio. "I am not here today as a scorned wife. I am here as a custodian of this family's legacy, and more importantly, as a protector of shareholder value. The moral emergency I cited is not a matter of the heart. It is a matter of the balance sheet." Her professionalism was a bucket of ice water on the simmering drama. This was a language the board understood. Julian finally spoke, his voice tight with fury. "This is absurd. Elara, you are an architect. You know nothing of the complexities of corporate finance." "I know how to read a ledger, Julian," she replied without looking at him, her attention focused on the board members. "And I know fraud when I see it." She proceeded with the dispassionate precision of a surgeon to lay out her case. She didn't make accusations. She presented facts. She slid copies of bank statements, property leases, and internal expense reports across the table. "Exhibit A," she began. "A lease agreement for a luxury apartment in Soho, paid for over the last 18 months, not by Julian Vance personally, but by a subsidiary of Vance Holdings under the budget code for off-site project development. Total expenditure $450,000. The sole resident of that apartment, Ms. Isabella Rossi." She continued, her voice never wavering. "Exhibit B, a series of transactions funneling over $3 million to a shell corporation named Rossi International Art. This money was earmarked for the procurement of lobby art for the Meridian. The director of this corporation is a Mr. Marco Rossi, Isabella Rossi's first cousin, an independent appraisal of the art purchased." She slid a new document forward. "Values it at less than $500,000. Where Julian did the other $2.5 million go?" A wave of shock rippled through the room. This was no longer about a mistress. This was embezzlement, plain and simple. And finally, Exhibit C. Elara said, her voice dropping slightly. An executive review signed by Julian, authorizing a grant of backdated stock options to Ms. Rossi, citing her singular and unprecedented contributions to the Meridian project. Contributions so singular, they warranted a compensation package triple that of our head of engineering, a man with 30 years of experience. These options have diluted the value of every share held by everyone in this room, and every public shareholder we are sworn to protect. She sat back, her presentation finished. She had laid the foundation of his downfall brick by evidentiary brick. Julian was ashen-faced. He looked cornered, a predator suddenly finding himself in a cage. "This is creative accounting," he stammered, looking at his allies for support. "The cost of doing business on a project of this scale, every great man has his expenses. Look at the tower we built. It will generate billions in revenue. This is a rounding error. A rounding error." It was Eleanor Hayes who spoke, her voice laced with icy contempt. "We are not the Medici court, Julian. We are a publicly traded company with a fiduciary duty. What you call expenses, the SEC would call wire fraud." Ben Carter, the pragmatist, leaned forward. "Forget the SEC for a moment. The reputational risk is catastrophic. When this leaks, and it will leak, our stock will plummet. We'll be buried in shareholder lawsuits for years. Your indiscretion," he said the word distastefully, "is no longer a personal matter. It's a multi-billion-dollar crisis." Julian, desperate, turned on Elara. "Look at her. This is nothing but a vengeful fantasy. She's been planning this, trying to destroy me because she couldn't keep me." The personal attack hung in the air, ugly and raw. Before Elara could respond, Arthur Vance, Sr., spoke for the first time. His voice was low, heavy, and filled with a terrible, weary sadness. "Enough, Julian." The two words fell like boulders into the room. "When I handed this company to you," Arthur continued, his eyes locked on his son, "I gave you one piece of advice. I told you that any man can build something tall, but it takes a man of character to build something that lasts. The Vance name is not just a brand on a building. It is supposed to be a guarantee of integrity. A bond. You have taken that bond, that sacred trust we have built over a century, and you have sold it off cheap to finance your sordid little affair." He gestured toward Elara. "You speak of her as if she is the enemy. This woman has raised your children. She has stood by your side with a grace you have never deserved. And today she has shown more courage and more concern for the future of this company than you have in the past 2 years. You did not just betray your wife, son. You betrayed your name. You betrayed me." The condemnation from his father broke something in Julian. The rage and defiance drained away, leaving behind a hollow, desperate man. Robert Caldwell, seeing the battle was lost, tried to salvage the situation. A vote for removal would be an admission of guilt. It would create chaos. "The chaos has already been created, Robert," Elara said calmly. "What we are doing now is restoring order." Caldwell grimaced. "Then we must call the vote. The motion on the floor invoked by Mrs. Vance is for the temporary removal of Julian Vance as chairman of the board, pending a full internal and external investigation. We will vote in order of seniority." He looked directly at Eleanor Hayes, the most senior member after Arthur. "Aye," Eleanor said instantly, her voice clear. The vote went around the table. 2 of Julian's staunchest allies, men he'd brought onto the board himself, voted nay, their voices weak. The others were a cascade of ayes, each one a nail in Julian's coffin. It came down to the final two members, before Caldwell and Julian himself. The vote stood at 4 for removal, 3 against. A young woman named Sarah Jenkins, who ran the company's tech division, hesitated, looking from Julian's desperate face to Ilara's calm one. "Aye," she whispered. The final member, a gruff manufacturing head, voted nay. The tally was 5 for removal, 4 against. Caldwell and Julian were yet to vote. "I vote nay," Caldwell announced as expected. The vote was 5 to 5. It all came down to Julian. In a final pathetic act of defiance, he would have to vote to save himself. "Nay," he choked out. The vote was 6 against removal, 5 for. It seemed he had survived by the slimmest of margins. But Caldwell had miscalculated the room. He turned to Ilara. "The motion fails." "You seem to be forgetting the clause under which we are convened, Robert," Ilara said, her voice cutting through his premature victory. "Article 9, Section 4 is explicit. In the event of an emergency vote concerning the chairman is recused from voting. His vote is not valid." Caldwell's face went white as he realized his error. The vote was, in fact, 5 to 5. A perfect tie. A profound, suffocating silence descended upon the boardroom. Every person at the table turned to look at Ilara. The city skyline watched indifferent. In that moment, 100 years of history, a multi-billion-dollar corporation, and the future of the Vance family, all rested on her. Julian stared at her, his eyes now stripped of all anger and arrogance. They were pleading. In them, she saw a flicker of the man she had once loved, the brilliant, charming boy who had promised her the world. He was begging her silently to remember that boy, to remember their life together, their children, to show mercy. Ilara's gaze softened for a fraction of a second. She thought of Liam and Sophia. She was not doing this to destroy their father, but to protect their future from his weakness. He saw mercy as forgiveness. She saw it as saving the legacy he was actively setting on fire. The foundation had to be sound for them. She met his pleading gaze, her expression unyielding. She picked up the Vance family seal. The gold was cool and heavy in her palm, a tangible link to the generations of women who had guarded the family's heart. She was simply the first who had to use it as a weapon. "As per the bylaws invoked," she announced, her voice ringing with absolute finality. "In the event of a tie, the deciding vote is cast by the holder of the family seal." She stood up, holding the seal for all to see. "On the matter of the removal of Julian Vance as chairman," she said, her voice echoing in the silent glass mausoleum, "I, Ilara Vance, cast my vote. For the protection of this company, for the preservation of this family's legacy, and for the future of my children, I vote aye." The word landed with the force of a guillotine. It was done. Julian Vance, the Titan. The visionary crumpled in his chair as if his strings had been cut. He made a small, wounded sound. The spell of his power was broken. Arthur Vance Sr. cleared his throat, his expression grim. "This board recognizes the motion has passed. I will assume the role of interim chairman effective immediately. Our first order of business will be to restore stability and integrity to Vance Holdings. This meeting is adjourned." The board members filed out quickly, murmuring amongst themselves, a palpable sense of relief mixing with the shock. They avoided looking at the man they had just deposed. Only Arthur, Ilara, and Julian remained. Arthur walked to his son. He didn't touch him. "You will clear out your desk," he said, his voice devoid of all warmth. "You will cooperate with the investigation, and you will not speak to the press. Is that understood?" Julian just nodded, staring blankly at the obsidian table. Arthur gave Alara one last look, a look of profound, weary respect, and then he too was gone. Now they were alone, the builder and the architect in the silent monument to their broken marriage. Was it worth it, Alara? Julian finally whispered, his voice raw with a pain she hadn't heard in years. Was destroying me worth it? Alara walked around the table until she stood before him. She looked down at the shattered man who was her husband, and for the first time she allowed the deep, profound hurt she had buried for so long to surface in her eyes. "You were already destroyed, Julian," she said, her voice soft but unforgiving. "You just hadn't hit the ground yet. I didn't destroy you. I just signed the demolition permit." She turned and walked away, her footsteps sure and steady, leaving him alone in the wreckage of the empire he had lost, with nothing but the panoramic view of a city that no longer felt like his. That night marked the fall of a king and the rise of a queen. The story of Alara Vance became a legend whispered in the halls of power, a testament to the fact that true strength isn't always the loudest voice in the room, but the most resolute mind. She didn't just reclaim her dignity. She seized control of her destiny, proving that the guardian of a family's heart can also be its fiercest protector. Her story is a powerful reminder that betrayal can be a catalyst, and that from the rubble of a broken promise, one can build an unshakable empire of self-worth. If this story of strategy, betrayal, and ultimate vindication resonated with you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who appreciates a story of quiet strength. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more tales of intricate drama and powerful real-life events. What would you have done in Alara's position? Let us know in the comments below.